Welcome back to Euro Transfer Review. That's right, it is back for the second week in a row. We're here for the whole of transfer season, and today I'm joined by Patrick Van Straten. How's it going?
Not bad, man. Not bad.
Good.
I mean, the whole of transfer season this year, seems to incorporate the end of last season and the beginning of next season. It's good. It's like the old days when people could just buy a player halfway through the year and completely screw their rivals. It's quite exciting.
Yeah, it is pretty mad, isn't it? I mean, the Champions League ends on Saturday, but then French football is kicking off on the weekend as well. So
yeah,
and then Premier League and Bundesliga back in 2 or 3 weeks' time as well. So yeah, it's just a pretty mad time in general, isn't it? And we've got some pretty mad transfers to talk about today. What about that for a transition? Our first one is Gabriel to Arsenal. Pat, fill us in.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like you've hyped it there by saying mad transfers, and it's Arsenal, team with terrible defence, seeks to buy better defender. But according to the rumours, Arsenal have agreed a fee with Lille for Gabriel, the Brazilian centre-back, and it's now up to the Brazilian where his future lies. According to Ed Aarons and Fabrizio Romano in The Guardian, the Gunners' offer of about 24 million euros has been enough to satisfy the French club, and I think there'll probably be 5 or 6 more in add-ons there. Now, obviously, back in January, you might have first heard about Gabriel as linked with Everton when it was rumoured that they were going to pay 30 mil to bring him in. And that kind of dragged on into the summer. But as it went on, it seemed like there were other suitors coming to the fore. Man United made contact with the players' representatives as late as last week. But right now, the major rivals to Arsenal for his signature are Napoli. Though it's going to kind of depend on how quickly they can shift Kalidou Koulibaly, who, of course, is discussing a move to Manchester City at present. The only thing that's certain right now is that Gabriel is leaving Lille. I believe that the club president has said that 3 clubs have met their valuation. He's clearly keen for a new challenge. The club are ready to sell him, as they always are, really, with these young players. And so it'll be kind of interesting to see who can get a deal over the line. Obviously, Lille have very good connections with Napoli, having just sold them Victor Osimhen. They have good connections with Arsenal, having sold them Nicolas Pepe. So I think that this decision is going to have to be made in the very near future. But to be honest with you, the English press at the moment are saying that Arsenal are in the lead for this signing. I'm kind of unsure about that, because I think that if they were, he'd have just decided. Whereas the fact that we seem to be waiting on Napoli makes me wonder if maybe he would prefer a move there, because otherwise he could have just said yes to Arsenal a couple of days ago. But whatever, I think that he's a very good player, and the numbers seem to back that up, don't they, McCubbin?
Yeah, it's true, actually. You would have thought that maybe this deal would have been completed a bit sooner if he was that keen, although I did hear apparently Jose Font apparently he was asking Jose Font about the Premier League, which suggests that he's probably interested or maybe unsure. But yeah, like you say, Pat, he has posted very good numbers this season. I think the kind of standout kind of quality that he would bring to Arsenal or any club who lands him is his ability to play out from the back. His 4.8 passes into the final third per 90 would rank him 4th in the Arsenal squad and 1st among the club's defenders. He also completes 72% of his long balls. He's particularly good at switching play. Not so good on the ground, actually. I think that's an area of his game which he can probably improve in. But 72% long ball accuracy is pretty excellent. For comparison, David Luiz completes 3.2 passes into the final third and Mustafi 3, so they lag behind him quite a lot. And as for passes in general, only Xhaka and Ceballos can beat his 52.5 a game. He ranks a lot lower for progressive passes with 4.3. Tierney, Kolasinac and Maitland-Niles would beat him in that respect. But he's still ahead of the club's centre-backs, which does suggest that I think under Arteta the club probably have kind of struggled a little bit to progress the ball through the centre, clearly relying a lot on the full-backs this season. And he's also solid defensively too. He wins 86% of his tackles, wins 65% of his aerial duels, and is successful with 39% of his pressures, which I think is the best record at Lille and would also rank 1st at Arsenal as well. So a very all-round good defender. A lot of stats there to digest, but essentially he looks like he would be a bit of an upgrade in that centre-half position. Obviously, you've got William Saliba coming back as well, so quite a young centre-back pairing that could maybe start developing there. Obviously, once Mustafi's back from injury, you'd expect him to be the kind of first choice there. But especially with kind of questions over David Luiz towards the end of the season, I feel like this would be a good move for Arsenal. He's also left-footed, and Arsenal don't have any left-footed centre-backs at this moment in time. And also obviously this would be a step up. Obviously the Premier League from Ligue 1. However, Arsenal and Lille post fairly similar kind of possession stats. So if he keeps his game up, we can see these numbers probably translating kind of fairly accurately, if a little bit roughly. But Pat, does this transfer excite you at all as an Arsenal fan?
Yeah, I mean it does. It provided that we get it done. I think that it is really exciting. I think Squawka put up a tweet where they said that Saliba and Gabriel were among the four Ligue 1 players with the highest tackle success rate last season. And when you watch Gabriel, he very rarely goes to ground. But he's extremely quick as well. I think he's kind of allowed Lille to change style. If you look at the 2018-19 season, no team caught opponents offside fewer times than Lille per game. Whereas this season, they caught opponents offside the most of any side in Ligue 1. Wow. And what that suggests to me is that they've been able to play a higher line, perhaps due to his pace. And we do actually have one left-footed centre-back, I will say. We do have Pablo Marie, but he's obviously out of commission for a while and has barely played. So I'm not surprised that people forget him. But I think that this is a great signing. If you can get it done, he's 6'3", good in the air, good passer, doesn't do stupid things seemingly, and even if he isn't amazing, he's probably going to end up being decent. So yes, I think that this is a very sensible move for Arsenal or for Napoli or Everton if one of those sides can get it closed as well. But yeah, right now just staying calm, just not getting too excited about Arsenal being competent yet, because that is a way to get your fingers burned.
For sure. Yeah, I don't blame you for that. But what do you guys reckon about this potential transfer? Would Arsenal be getting a good deal here? 24 million does seem very, very decent to me. Let us know in the comments below. Let's move on to our next section.
So next up, we have EFD fixes. In this section, we analyse a transfer rumour and offer alternatives in case a club is not able to pull off that major deal. And this week we do have one of the biggest deals of the transfer window. Who have we got, Michael McCubbin?
Yes, of course, Kai Havertz to Chelsea. The Germans obviously been back in the headlines this week following reports that Chelsea have reopened negotiations with Bayer Leverkusen over the 21-year-old. The Blues have already agreed a 5-year deal with the player, but are still at loggerheads with Leverkusen over a fee. The German club are holding firm in their €100 million valuation, something which Chelsea's latest offer of €65 million plus 15 million in add-ons falls short of. So yeah, despite there kind of being more reports about this, it doesn't look like the clubs are any closer to agreeing a fee now than they were, say, 1 or 2 weeks ago. But it is clear that Havertz wants the move. Obviously, he has signed that agreement with them. But it just looks like Leverkusen are determined to hold out for as big a fee as possible, and have apparently given them a 10-day deadline with the new season on the horizon. Already feels like they're echoing kind of Dortmund's tactics with Jadon Sancho here. So it's a hard one to tell. I mean, I feel like this is something that could be either done by the weekend or could drag out for another 2 weeks. I think the thing that Chelsea do have on their side, obviously, is that they are facing zero competition. Previous to this summer, Real Madrid and Bayern were probably the two other clubs who are most strongly linked with him, but it's clear that they don't really have the funds or the desire to go for him this summer. But I think that the big kind of hurdle in Chelsea meeting Leverkusen's valuation is, of course, the fact that they need to do rebuilding in other areas of the squad. They're already, known to be targeting Ben Chilwell at left back and Declan Rice as a kind of, cover in central midfield or even at centre back. And obviously there's the question of the goalkeeper position as well. Can they really afford to spend €100 million on another attacker when they've already brought in Ziyech and Timo Werner? I think it is debatable, to say the least. Leverkusen, meanwhile, are apparently ready to go in for Patrick Schick at 28 million euros to reinforce the attack if Havertz leaves, which is an interesting one. I think last week we actually did speak about this on Transfer Review, and I think we suggested Andrea Bellotti as a kind of as an investment in centre forward to kind of reinforce that attack. But Pat, from a Chelsea perspective, there are probably 2 or 3 alternatives that they could turn to if this deal doesn't come off, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first alternative would be to sign nobody in this position. They could just spend the money on those actual areas of need, like you talked about, centre-back, left-back, goalkeeper. I would argue that those are more significant. Obviously, Pedro and Willian are gone, so they're going to need to find a way to replace those minutes. Willian especially was a very useful player for them last season. But on the other hand, Callum Hudson-Odoi didn't see that much action, so you can assume he's going to step up a bit as well, and you'd hope so, given the amount they're paying him. You can also argue that Timo Werner is capable of playing off the left, Hakim Ziyech is capable of playing off the right, so plus Pulisic, plus Hudson-Odoi, plus Mount, plus Tammy Abraham, they do seem like they're covered in forward positions. But if they think they're still a man short, there are other options in the market. Of course, when you're talking about spending 80-90 mil on Havertz, then 70 mil, which is the buyout clause of Real Sociedad's Mikel Oyarzabal, actually looks quite reasonable. 10 goals and 11 assists last season in La Liga for Real Sociedad. That's very, very impressive indeed. Obviously, Brentford's Said Benrahma has been linked. He'd be more towards the 30 mil end of the spectrum and is probably interested in a move following Brentford's failure to make the Premier League through the playoffs. But one guy who we have seen kind of shopped around the Prem, but not particularly towards Chelsea, is Watford's Ismaila Sarr, who I thought was really, really impressive last season. Now, he doesn't offer the positional versatility, let's say, of guys like Pulisic or guys like Kai Havertz. He's not going to play centre forward. He's not going to play as a 10. So he'd really be competition in those wide areas. But I think his output in that Watford side was good enough that you'd have to take a look. Last season, 2 shots, 2.1 dribbles a game, 1.1 chances created per 90. Those were all very solid in a pretty weak Watford side. Led the squad for passes into the box with 1.4 per 90. Non-penalty expected goals of 0.25. So that's not including his expected assists. That was actually better than Troy Deeney. And Deeney was the only player at Watford to beat Sarr's goal tally of 5. He got 4 assists. So he's expected goals basically says that this is a guy who should be contributing a goal or assist every other game on a relegation side in his first season adapting to a new league as a 21-22-year-old. I think that given all that, that's a really, really exciting. That's a recipe for an explosion, and you can see why clubs like Liverpool have been linked with him. But Watford apparently want 40 mil plus. And like we've said, he's probably not got quite the ceiling that you'd expect from Havertz. Havertz could probably be a second striker, maybe a 10, but certainly a centre forward for a long, long time. Great technical level. Whereas Sarr, I think, is still kind of working on that because of the team he came from at Rennes, where he was just really required to use his pace and skill to beat players. I think that once you go from a side which doesn't have the majority of possession to a side which does, you obviously need to learn to play slightly differently. And so you could argue that Havertz might find it easier to hit the ground running at Chelsea than Sarr, despite Sarr's experience in the Premier League. I think, on the other hand, is Havertz and no new goalkeeper better overall for Chelsea than Sarr and keeping funds aside to go and get, say, Andre Onana or something? I think that overall, probably the latter improves your team maybe a little bit more. So, I don't know. I think that this is quite a sensible move and maybe one that Chelsea could consider if they aren't able to get that Havertz deal over the line. Or in case somebody like Bayern Munich come after winning the Champions League and gazump them for him at the last minute.
Yeah, I totally agree. To be fair, I think with Havertz, it's a little bit like the. I mean, it's not. I wouldn't say it's like the Sancho situation actually, because I think United are clearly more in need. But in terms of, one of Europe's top talents, fairly little competition for him or no competition for him at this moment in time. It might just be the time to strike on a talent like this, and you'll be reaping rewards for 10 years maybe. But yeah, in terms of squad building for next season, in particular, it doesn't seem like the wisest move when there are so many other areas in need. And Sarr, I think is definitely worth a look at. I don't know if he's necessarily the ideal candidate at that price, but at the very least would offer pretty good rotation options for Lampard on that right side. So yeah, what do you guys make of our take on this transfer? Let us know in the comments below, and let's go on to the transfer shocker. So for last week's transfer shocker, we had Ainsley Maitland-Niles to Tottenham, a pretty far-fetched rumour which I haven't heard much about since. This week, not such a far-fetched rumour, but at the price that's being talked about maybe a little bit, it's David Brooks to Man United, Pat.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't really credit this except that it's coming from multiple outlets in the UK press reporting that United are keen on signing Bournemouth's David Brooks. Now, he obviously missed pretty much the entire 2019-20 campaign, having had ankle surgery, but he did make 8 starts following lockdown, and he looked rusty, but still useful, having had a really, really good season for them last year. Now, he came in from Sheffield United originally for about 10 million quid. And the Cherries now want 4 times that to move him on, which I think is insane for a guy who's pretty much got 1 season in the top flight and has sat out most of the season with injury. On the other hand, he'd maybe kind of make sense. Like, I mean, I'm not going to... He's not a similar player to Sancho, but he covers similar positions. We can say that. On the other hand, it might be a little bit difficult to sell this to fans who've got excited about buying one of the best young players in the world. But Jesse Lingard's tipped to leave this summer, Andreas Pereira as well. Solskjaer is going to need to add depth, so it's not totally insane, I would say.
Yeah, I know what you mean with that. I think it's kind of weird timing. It would be weird timing for United to pull off a transfer like this, especially at £40 million. That seems very, very inflated. For a player who's got about one season plus about 9 games of Premier League experience, and at 23 doesn't really have an awful lot of even kind of top 2 tier experience, although despite that very good first season with Bournemouth. But like you say, he does cover areas that Solskjaer needs depth in. That right wing position obviously is in dire need. Daniel James was brought in as a squad player last term and couldn't even really get any game time towards the end of this season. Solskjaer didn't even really trust him to come off the bench for Greenwood. He's also played a bit at CAM as well, although you'd expect that he probably wouldn't feature there much. But yeah, back to that 18-19 season was very impressive. He hit 7 goals and 5 assists in 30 appearances. His XG and assists per 90 stood at 0.48, so kind of similar to the kind of level we saw from Ismaila Sarr this season. Limited minutes post restart. This term, he averaged 1.2 key passes per 90 and 1.1 shots, which was a little bit down from his averages last season. However, his dribbling has improved. He completed 2.1 dribbles this term compared up from 1 last season. So I mean, I don't know. It's difficult to look at his numbers after the restart because he only got just over 500 minutes. But in general, very, very solid in a Bournemouth in the Bournemouth side, which haven't been great the last 2 seasons, especially not this term. For comparison, Dan James makes 1 key pass, completes 1.1 dribbles and takes 1.6 shots in a United side which is clearly far, far more productive than Bournemouth. So he would be a clear upgrade on his Wales teammate. But that 40 million just seems very steep. I think 30 million max is what United should be going for. Even I'd argue maybe even less, 20-25, considering Bournemouth have been relegated. I feel like, at least from what we can see in these reports, that maybe there's this kind of feeling of United having to pay that premium that they often have to pay. But for me, I don't think United need this move enough. I mean, Lingard and Pereira, if they do leave, they will need to be cover. But I don't know. I think if United are gonna pull this deal off, I think they have to go lower than 30 million. If they spent 40 million on David Brooks now, I don't even think it's bad PR from a fan's perspective. But if you're Jadon Sancho in Germany or even Dortmund looking at that, it doesn't really yeah, it's not a great sign of where United's priorities lie if they're not willing to make up 20 million euros on Sancho, but are willing to overpay 10-15 million pounds on David Brooks. So yeah, I can't see this developing at a particularly fast rate, I must say. But as a squad player, I definitely would take him. I think he's clearly someone who could be trusted to come off the bench or rotate in that attack. And, you know, surrounded by better quality, you could see his numbers improve, you know, at Old Trafford. So I'm definitely not totally against this move, but considering United's priorities this summer, it does seem a little bit weird that a transfer like this is coming up right now. But that's all we have time for on this week's transfer review. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave it a like, and I forgot to say, do remember to subscribe to Euro Football Daily and hit the notification bell if you haven't done so already. I was looking up the other day, I think half of you guys who watch our videos are unsubscribed, so there's plenty of you out there. Join the club. Pat, where should they go next?
Well, if you're on a little subscribing spree, then head over to Football Daily Podcasts. If you would like to check out the podcast in video form, of course, you can listen to it as well through Spotify or Overcast, whichever podcast app you use. We really appreciate your support, and often it's a way for us to look at clubs or stories which we can't necessarily cover on YouTube. So we've done recent rebuilds of Tottenham. We've talked a little bit about the situation at Barcelona. Go over and check it out, and if you like it, then subscribe.
Nice one. Yeah, I highly recommend you do that. Anyway, yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.